Joseph Priestley is a figure whose life and work spanned across a diverse array of intellectual pursuits. Known primarily for his pioneering experiments in chemistry, Priestley was a man of wide-ranging interests. Philosophy, politics, theology, and education all played crucial roles in his life. His discoveries in the realm of science, particularly his identification of oxygen, laid the groundwork for the modern understanding of chemistry. However, his intellectual contributions extended well beyond science. Priestley was also an influential religious thinker, a political reformer, and an advocate for religious freedom and intellectual tolerance. His motivation throughout life was driven by a strong intellectual curiosity, a desire to improve society, and a deep-seated belief in the power of reason. This video will explore the motivations that underpinned Priestley's life and work. These motivations included his religious and philosophical beliefs, his curiosity-driven scientific exploration, and his advocacy for political and social reform. Through examining these motivations, we will gain a deeper understanding of Priestley as not only a scientist but as a thinker whose ideas and actions helped shape the intellectual and social landscape of his time. 1. Early life and intellectual development. Joseph Priestley was born on March 13, 1733, in the town of Birstall in West Yorkshire, England. He came from a modest background. His father, a cloth dresser, was a supporter of the Protestant dissenters, and Priestley's early education was deeply influenced by his nonconformist upbringing. Priestley's family was not wealthy, and his early years were marked by financial challenges. His parents, however, placed a strong emphasis on education, which was to shape his future intellectual trajectory. Priestley was sent to an academy in Daventry at the age of 18 to study for the ministry. It was here that he was first exposed to a wide variety of intellectual traditions, particularly the teachings of the Enlightenment. The academy was known for its progressive and liberal education, particularly in comparison to the religious orthodoxy of the time. It was during these formative years that Priestley began to encounter ideas that would challenge conventional theological thought and encourage him to think critically about religion, philosophy, and science. At the academy, Priestley was introduced to the works of key Enlightenment thinkers such as John Locke, Isaac Newton, and others who championed the power of reason. The idea that knowledge could be discovered through careful observation and logical reasoning deeply influenced Priestley. These philosophical foundations would later become crucial to his scientific work, as Priestley believed that reason and empirical investigation were key to understanding both the natural world and the divine. By the time Priestley had finished his studies, his theological views had started to deviate from mainstream Christian doctrine. He was drawn to Unitarianism, a Christian doctrine that rejected the orthodox belief in the Trinity and emphasized the oneness of God. His embrace of Unitarianism marked the beginning of his intellectual journey as a dissenting voice against the religious orthodoxy of his time. 2. The role of curiosity in Priestley's scientific work. Priestley's motivations in science were deeply rooted in his intellectual curiosity. Like many thinkers of the Enlightenment, he believed that human reason and empirical observation could lead to new knowledge and a deeper understanding of the world. Priestley's scientific career is often defined by his experiments in chemistry, where his interest in the nature of air and gases led him to make groundbreaking discoveries. Priestley's early scientific work was primarily in the area of electricity. He conducted a series of experiments on the nature of electrical conductivity and the effects of electrical charge. However, it was his work on gases that would ultimately define his legacy. Priestley was deeply intrigued by the composition of the air and sought to understand its properties. At the time, it was believed that air was an indivisible substance, but Priestley, following in the footsteps of other natural philosophers, began to investigate whether air was composed of different gases. In 1774, Priestley made his most famous discovery, the isolation of oxygen. Priestley was experimenting with mercuric oxide when he noticed that heating the substance released a gas that supported combustion and was absorbed by animals more readily than regular air. This gas, which he initially called dephlogisticated air, would later be identified as oxygen by Antoine Lavoisier. While Lavoisier would go on to revolutionize chemistry with his work on the role of oxygen in combustion, Priestley's experiments provided the empirical evidence that made this understanding possible. Priestley's motivation for conducting these experiments was not merely the desire for fame or recognition, it was driven by an insatiable intellectual curiosity. Priestley was determined to answer fundamental questions about the nature of the world, and he was committed to employing experimental methods to do so. His scientific work was also grounded in the idea that understanding nature could lead to greater appreciation for the Creator. Priestley saw science as a means of uncovering the mysteries of God's creation, and he believed that by revealing the laws of nature, humans could become closer to understanding the divine. His scientific curiosity was coupled with a deep belief in empirical observation. Priestley was particularly influenced by the works of Isaac Newton, whose methods of observation and experimentation in the natural world inspired many of the thinkers of the time. Priestley's approach to science, like Newton's, was one of careful observation and methodical experimentation, with an emphasis on tangible, observable phenomena. 3. Priestley's religious beliefs and their impact on his work. Religion played an essential role in shaping Priestley's life and motivations. Priestley was a devout Unitarian, and his religious beliefs had a profound influence on his scientific work and philosophical writings. As a Unitarian minister, Priestley rejected the traditional Christian doctrine of the Trinity, which posited that God exists as three distinct persons, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and instead argued that God is one singular entity. This view set him apart from the majority of his contemporaries, who adhered to orthodox Christian beliefs. Priestley's religious convictions motivated him to champion religious freedom and tolerance. He believed that each individual should have the right to interpret religious teachings for themselves, guided by reason and conscience, rather than adhering blindly to dogma or tradition. Priestley was a vocal advocate for the right to dissent from established religious and political authorities. His writings on religion emphasized the importance of rational thought in religious matters, and he strongly opposed religious persecution. Priestley's theology was also informed by his belief that the natural world could be understood through reason and scientific inquiry. He believed that the study of nature and the universe revealed the workings of God's design. In his view, science and religion were not mutually exclusive but rather complementary. His belief in God's creation provided the intellectual framework for his scientific work, and his scientific discoveries in turn affirmed his religious convictions. For Priestley, understanding nature through science was a means of appreciating the divine order of the universe. Despite his intellectual commitment to Unitarianism, Priestley faced significant opposition from religious authorities throughout his career. His rejection of the orthodox Christian doctrine of the Trinity, as well as his progressive views on religious tolerance, made him a controversial figure. Priestley's religious ideas were often at odds with both the established Church of England and the broader religious establishment in Britain, leading to public criticism and personal attacks. 4. Priestley's political beliefs and support for revolutionary movements. Alongside his scientific and religious endeavors, Priestley was also deeply engaged in political thought. He was a passionate advocate for political reform, particularly the promotion of individual liberties, social equality, and the rights of minorities. Priestley's political beliefs were rooted in his commitment to reason, freedom, and democracy. He was an outspoken supporter of both the American and French revolutions, seeing them as opportunities for political and social transformation that would lead to greater liberty and justice for oppressed peoples. Priestley believed that the power of reason could be used to reform society and create a more just world. He argued that individuals should have the right to govern themselves, free from the control of monarchies, aristocracies, or established religious institutions. Priestley's commitment to political reform was linked to his broader intellectual values, including the belief in freedom of thought and expression. However, Priestley's support for the French Revolution and its principles of liberty, equality, and fraternity brought him into conflict with the British establishment. In the 1790s, Priestley became a target of conservative groups who saw his support for revolutionary ideals as a threat to the status quo. In 1791, following the publication of his pamphlet defending the French Revolution, Priestley's home in Birmingham was attacked and destroyed by a mob of political opponents. Despite the violence and personal loss, Priestley remained committed to his political ideals, and he continued to advocate for social and political change. 5. The impact of Priestley's work on science and philosophy. Priestley's work had a profound impact on both the scientific and philosophical landscapes of his time. His pioneering discoveries in chemistry, particularly his work on gases, played a crucial role in the development of modern chemistry. Though Priestley's discovery of oxygen was overshadowed by the work of Antoine Lavoisier, Priestley's experiments provided essential empirical evidence that helped lay the foundation for later advancements in chemical theory. In addition to his work on gases, Priestley made significant contributions to the fields of electricity, heat, and combustion. His investigations into the electrical properties of materials helped shape the understanding of electricity in the 18th century. Priestley's approach to science, emphasizing empirical observation and experimentation, was instrumental in advancing scientific knowledge during the Enlightenment. Beyond his scientific contributions, Priestley was also a prolific writer and thinker in the fields of theology and political philosophy. His writings on Unitarianism challenged traditional Christian beliefs and called for greater religious tolerance and freedom of thought. In the political sphere, Priestley's advocacy for democracy, civil liberties, and the rights of religious minorities influenced the development of liberal thought in Britain and beyond. 6. Priestley's later years in America. After the destruction of his home and scientific equipment in the 1791 Birmingham riots, Priestley decided to leave Britain for the United States in 1794. The attack on his home, along with the increasing hostility he faced from conservative political and religious forces, made it difficult for Priestley to continue his work in Britain. Though the loss of his library and lab was devastating, his departure marked a new chapter in his life and career. Priestley's move to America was influenced by his desire to continue his intellectual pursuits in a more politically and socially tolerant environment. In America, he was welcomed by many intellectuals and Unitarian ministers, particularly in Pennsylvania, where he settled. In the United States, Priestley was able to continue his scientific, theological, and political work, although he faced challenges in adapting to his new environment. Despite the relatively warm reception he received in America, Priestley's later years were not without difficulty. Although he found a community of like-minded individuals, particularly within Unitarianism, his influence in the scientific community diminished. His new work, such as his History of the Corruptions of Christianity, 1782, which criticized Orthodox Christianity, found some resonance in America but was also met with resistance. Moreover, Priestley's later scientific endeavors, while continuing to include chemistry and philosophy, lacked the groundbreaking impact of his earlier discoveries. Priestley's relationship with his new American peers was complex. Many American intellectuals, including some members of the scientific community, were inspired by his previous work but found his later ideas difficult to reconcile with more progressive currents of American intellectual thought. His support for the French Revolution, which had been a major aspect of his British political identity, also became increasingly isolated, particularly as American politics shifted in more conservative directions after the Revolution. Nevertheless, Priestley remained committed to his intellectual pursuits and continued to write prolifically until his death. He maintained his belief in the power of science to improve humanity and the importance of free thought in both religion and politics. Priestley died on February 6, 1804, in Northumberland, Pennsylvania. His legacy, though often overshadowed by later figures in science and philosophy, remains an integral part of the intellectual history of the Enlightenment. 7. Priestley's impact on subsequent thinkers and scientific advancements. While Joseph Priestley was not widely recognized during his lifetime as the central figure of his era, his contributions to science and philosophy paved the way for many developments that followed. In particular, his work on gases, chemical reactions, and his role in the early debates surrounding the theory of combustion were influential in the emergence of modern chemistry. Priestley's discovery of oxygen, although it was Lavoisier who later provided the definitive theory of oxygen in relation to combustion, set the stage for Lavoisier's work. Priestley's empirical evidence and methods of experimenting with gases were vital in establishing the groundwork for later advancements. Priestley's discoveries did not just help shape the discipline of chemistry, they also contributed to the development of the scientific method itself, encouraging a more systematic approach to experimentation and observation. In addition to his scientific work, Priestley's philosophical and political ideas had a considerable impact on thinkers in both Britain and America. His advocacy for reason, intellectual freedom, and religious tolerance resonated with the broader ideals of the Enlightenment, and his belief that the state should not impose religious orthodoxy on its citizens contributed to the intellectual underpinnings of modern liberal thought. Priestley's ideas on religious freedom and his defense of Unitarianism were a central aspect of the intellectual landscape in the United States during the early 19th century. His religious philosophy was instrumental in shaping the Unitarian movement in America, which grew to become an important force in American religious life, influencing theologians like William Ellery Channing. Priestley's Unitarianism also shaped the development of American liberal Christianity, which emphasized rationality and individual interpretation of religious texts. In the realm of political thought, Priestley's support for the French Revolution and his opposition to religious and political authoritarianism helped to lay the groundwork for more democratic political theories in Britain and America. His belief in the power of reason to challenge traditional authority was echoed by later thinkers in both countries, particularly those involved in movements for democratic reform and human rights. Priestley's influence extended well into the 19th century, particularly in the areas of religious thought, political theory, and the natural sciences. 8. The historical context of Priestley's work and its reception. Joseph Priestley lived during a period of dramatic intellectual, political, and social change. The Enlightenment, with its emphasis on reason, scientific inquiry, and the questioning of traditional authority, provided the intellectual context for his work. This era was characterized by a growing interest in scientific discovery, the pursuit of knowledge through empirical methods, and the questioning of religious and political institutions that had long held sway over society. Priestley's scientific endeavors took place during a time when the field of chemistry was in its infancy. While his contemporaries, including Lavoisier, were working toward a more rigorous and systematic understanding of chemical reactions, Priestley's contributions were crucial in shaping the early stages of this transformation. His work with gases, particularly his identification of oxygen, was one of the first steps toward the development of the modern atomic theory and the understanding of chemical reactions as processes involving the transformation of substances. In the religious realm, Priestley's Unitarianism represented a significant departure from the traditional Christian doctrines of his time. Unitarianism rejected the Trinitarian concept of God, which posited that God exists as three persons in one, and instead emphasized the oneness of God. Priestley's theological writings, which critiqued the orthodox Christian doctrines and called for a more rational approach to religious belief, were part of a broader intellectual movement that sought to reconcile reason with faith. Priestley's beliefs were part of a wave of religious dissent that contributed to the development of more liberal religious traditions in both Britain and America. Politically, Priestley's work coincided with the rise of revolutionary movements in America and France, which sought to overthrow monarchies and establish democratic republics. Priestley's support for these revolutions was rooted in his belief in liberty, equality, and the rights of individuals. His involvement in these political causes, however, made him a target of the conservative establishment in Britain, and his vocal support for the French Revolution, in particular, led to his persecution by those who viewed the revolutionaries as a threat to the existing social order. Priestley's work was not without its detractors. His scientific theories were often criticized by more conservative elements of the scientific community, especially when they challenged existing theories. His theological writings, particularly his rejection of the doctrine of the Trinity, led to his exclusion from many religious circles. Politically, his support for revolutionary movements put him at odds with the ruling class in Britain, and his ideas were often dismissed as radical and dangerous. Despite these challenges, Priestley remained committed to his intellectual pursuits and continued to promote his ideas, even in the face of adversity. 9. Joseph Priestley and the legacy of the Enlightenment. Joseph Priestley's life and work stand as a testament to the ideals of the Enlightenment, which emphasized reason, scientific inquiry, and the promotion of human rights. His contributions to the development of modern chemistry, his defense of intellectual freedom, and his support for democratic ideals reflect the key values of the Enlightenment. Though often overshadowed by other figures such as Lavoisier or Thomas Jefferson, Priestley's legacy as a thinker who combined scientific exploration with a commitment to social reform endures. Priestley's advocacy for reason, intellectual freedom, and tolerance continues to resonate in contemporary discussions about the relationship between science and religion, the role of government in regulating beliefs, and the rights of individuals to challenge established norms. His work was foundational in advancing scientific inquiry, and his philosophical ideas contributed to the development of liberal democratic thought. Priestley's life reflects the power of intellectual curiosity to shape both individual lives and the broader course of history. As one of the many intellectuals who helped to shape the Enlightenment, Joseph Priestley's legacy remains relevant today. His contributions to science, politics, and religion remind us of the enduring importance of questioning established beliefs, promoting rational inquiry, and striving to improve society for the benefit of all. 10. Priestley's legacy and final years. In the latter part of his life, Priestley faced personal challenges and professional setbacks. In 1794, after his home and scientific library were destroyed in the Birmingham riots, Priestley left Britain and moved to the United States, where he continued his work in theology and science. Although he struggled to find a suitable intellectual community in America, he remained active in his research and writing until his death in 1804. Priestley's legacy, however, continues to endure. His work in chemistry and his discovery of oxygen are foundational to the development of modern chemistry. His contributions to political thought and his defense of religious freedom have also left a lasting mark on the intellectual history of the 18th and 19th centuries. His life serves as an example of how an individual's intellectual pursuits, driven by curiosity, religious conviction, and a commitment to reform, can help shape the course of history. Conclusion. Joseph Priestley's motivations were rooted in an unyielding commitment to the pursuit of knowledge, whether it was in the realms of science, religion, or politics. His early life in the intellectual crucible of 18th-century Britain helped shape him into a figure who would challenge the scientific, religious, and political orthodoxy of his time. Priestley's scientific work, particularly his discovery of oxygen, laid the foundation for modern chemistry. His political and religious writings championed reason, freedom of thought, and social reform, influencing the development of both American and European intellectual traditions. Priestley's legacy endures, both in the lasting impact of his scientific contributions and in his advocacy for human rights and intellectual freedom. Through his work, Priestley exemplified the intellectual vigor and commitment to progress that characterized the Enlightenment, and his life serves as a model of how ideas can shape the course of history.